Hey yo, it's Gluke. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about operator. Let's go. So here we are back in Ableton. And if you've been following along for more than a few videos at this point, you know that I love to just use Ableton stock. And one of my favorites is operator. This is an FM synthesizer. At first glance, the UI is just kind of eye poison, to be honest. But once you figure out how to use operator, you can really start to craft some very unique sounds. This is, in my opinion, one of the most slept on things about Ableton. So let's go ahead and dive in and figure it out. Now, before we do the hands-on part, let's go ahead and look at the UI and we can figure out where everything is. Starting on the left here, this pink box, these are all of our oscillators, and we get 4 of them in operator. Pretty straightforward section here. We've got our volume, a fine tune, and our coarse knob. The fine tune works how you would expect it to. It's very incremental, but the coarse knob is based on our harmonic series. I covered it in my bonk bass tutorial, which I'll leave a link to below. But basically, the harmonic series is just a set of multiples of the fundamental frequency, which is just the note that we're playing. So if we have coarse set to 1, like this, it means that it's just playing the note that we're playing on our keyboard. If we set it to 2, it goes up 1 octave. If we set it to 3, it goes up an octave and a fifth. If we set it to 4, it goes up 2 octaves, and so on and so on. But this panel is pretty straightforward. Now, this middle section in green will change depending on which tab we are looking at, but they all look very similar to this. This is where our envelope settings are stored. We can also go into this oscillator tab and change the harmonics, but for just starting out, we'll go ahead and stick with this envelope tab. Our attack, decay, and release are right here, as well as our sustain. We also have peak and initial. Aside from the ADSR, the only other important things to look at in this section is the waveform that we are choosing. So in this case, it's a sine. And this phase section right here, this R stands for reset. So every time we press the key, the phase will reset to the beginning, or wherever we've set the phase to start. This R doesn't mean random, it means reset. So the rest of the tabs will all look like this, except for this tab, but I will cover that in a sec. So in this yellow box here, these are all of our general settings, and all of these settings will change things about the entire patch that we've made. So we've got an LFO that we can set. We've also got a filter that we can use. This is our pitch, envelope, spread, transpose. This is all like notes stuff. And then this bottom section here is going to be the other most important section that we look at. When we click on this bottom section here, we'll get a screen in the middle that looks like this. At the top, all of these little Tetris shapes are going to be our FM algorithms. So the signal flow goes from top to bottom. In this case, this one is selected. So A is going to be our carrier tone, or the main sound. Then B will FM into A, C will FM into B, and D will FM into C. And it'll go down this chain. We can change these and get different sounds, but for just starting out in operator, it's just best to leave it as is. This middle section here is how we can apply different effects based off of the MIDI. If we wanted this second oscillator to get quieter, if we had less velocity, we could go ahead and click here and select oscillator B volume level. And so that's how the routing works in this synth in particular. It's a little bit different than Serum, where it's just click and drag. In this page too, we also have access to our voices. So if we're making a bass, we'll want to set this voicing to 1. If we're making more of a pad or maybe a lead or something, we can keep our voices relatively higher. But the rest of this stuff for just starting out really doesn't matter. The main goal of this video is just to kickstart your workflow so you can start making sounds in operator. So I'm not really going to touch too much on all of this stuff. Okay, so now that we know what we're looking at, let me just get a quick beat going here. Okay, so I just made a quick drum loop here so that we have some context as to what's going on. I'll also add a little bit of sidechain to the compressor so we can hear the patch that we're making in context. So to start working in operator, if we're going to make basses, which is usually what you're going to end up making with operator, we want to make sure that we've chosen a note in the 0 octave. And that's because with operator, we cannot retune this oscillator into lower octaves, and we want this to be in the sub, and everything else is going to sit on top. So we just want to make sure that all of our notes are in the 0 octave region. And so I'll go ahead and just make a really simple dotted eighth pattern here. If we listen to it without anything else on this patch, we'll just get a sine wave in the sub-region. But we want to do more than that. So we've already seen me make a bonk bass, and so I'll just go ahead and make one really quick and walk you through what I'm doing here. I already know that the intervals I want are 4 and 2, but 4 is 2 octaves and 2 is 1 octave. Now this layer is going to be my FM layer. and I'll go ahead and just bring the sustain down. And as we increase the level, we can hear how it affects oscillator A. And if I go too far, it'll start to get really muddy like this. So I like it somewhere around there. Now I'll add this layer with a really tight envelope so that when I increase the volume of this, we'll be able to have a higher volume level, but that's because this is affecting the main oscillator for a much shorter amount of time than the other one. And this is just giving us a nice little pluck. But the main idea behind this, once we get the shape of our higher harmonics figured out, what we can do is go back to this first operator, and now we can start changing this envelope. So I don't want the release at 400. I would want it maybe closer to 50, just so that it stops playing when I stop holding the note. And then I'll go ahead and bring the sustain down, and we can really start to shape the overall sound. Here, for example, is way too short because we're cutting off the main carrier before the FMs have had a chance to do anything. Now, if we go ahead and look over here, this tone knob sort of acts like a filter, but it's not a filter. What this controls is the volume of the higher harmonics. So if I turn this down, we lose a lot of the low-mid power that's coming from this. But if I turn it up, we get that back. I would usually recommend just leaving this at 100 or 70 or whatever it's at by default. And then with our time knob, what our time knob is going to help us do is really dial in the timing of our envelopes here. So as I move this knob, if I bring it down here into the negative percentage values, what it's going to do is make the sound shorter. And if I increase it, it's going to make the sound longer. Okay, so this is what our super simple bonk bass sounds like in context. That's a really simple workflow on how to make a donk. What's really nice about Operator is that once we have this sounding pretty much how we want, it's really easy to generate new sounds because all we have to do is change our harmonic intervals with this coarse knob. I'll play it again and I'll start changing this coarse knob and you'll hear that we get different timbres. So there's a nice one, and we're using 5, which is our 2 octaves plus a major third. So if you're making bonks, this is the easiest way to start testing out new sounds. Now, when you're making bonks and basses that are just cleaner like this, I would not recommend changing the waveform just yet because the sine waves are going to give you really clean harmonics with the FM above the sub. But for the next one, what we'll go ahead and do is we'll make a wub. So for this one, I'm going to have it play on every other beat, so that way we can figure out how to get the timing right with regards to the beat, because we are using milliseconds here. The easiest way that I've found is to pitch it up 4 so that you can really hear the shape. We'll bring our sustain all the way down, and we'll increase the attack. Usually about 100 milliseconds to 200 milliseconds gives it a nice sort of fade in. We'll decrease the release so that it's not playing when we don't want it to. And now we can start to bring in the attack. Okay, now I'll go ahead and repitch this back down and set the voicing to 1. Now that we have these settings here, since this is our carrier tone, this one is also going to shape our volume because all of these aren't going to play unless this one is playing. So if I just increase the sustain here and I start to add some FM that's just 1 octave up, you'll hear how it'll change the timbre of this main oscillator here. So maybe that's what we're looking for. If you want to get more precise with it, what we can do is copy these settings over to this next envelope. The main 2 important ones being attack and decay. But as you can hear, the FM is starting to choke out the back half of this note here. So we would want to make the decay just a bit longer. So now it really starts to all move together. And if we listen to it within the context of the beat, we can see if I got the timing right of this envelope here. Now it's a little bit too slow, so what we can do is use this time knob and just start to bring this down a couple percentages. So it's really subtle, but with the time knob, you can really begin to feel the patch start to fit within the beat where you need it to. I'll go ahead and add my bass chain, and my bass chain is nothing that special. It's, if you want to copy it, it's 3 OTTs with these exact settings, and then a saturator, an EQ, and a limiter. You don't really need the filter. But let's go ahead and make something a bit more interesting. So maybe we try 4. Okay, that sounds interesting. Now let's try bringing this one up, and I'll go ahead and just leave the sustain all the way up. And then a bit of saturation. Okay, so that is another way that you can start experimenting. With these wubs as well, I would recommend that you don't change the waveform still, but you absolutely can, because that will just start to make the sound even crazier. So just for example, if I change this one to a, I'll do a square. And if I turn off the filter, you can hear that everything gets really, really harsh. So I usually just like to leave the filter on. But that's totally up to you whether or not you want to do that. Another thing we can do is from this screen here, we're on envelope. If we go to oscillator, we can manually add our harmonics. And so I'm not going to be too precise. I'll just draw something like this maybe. So that's another way you can start making these types of sounds. If you bring the filter all the way up, you can start making some really crazy stuff with these custom oscillators. So now we've covered this oscillator tab somewhat in depth. We can also try doing this pitch envelope. You can think of this knob on the pitch envelope sort of like a dry wet, except in this case, at 100%, it means that it's going to go all the way up to the peak, which is up 1 octave. And if we go all the way down to negative 100%, it's going to go down an octave. Think about the peak as like the maximum distance from the note, and then the pitch envelope is going to be which direction you want to go and how much of that direction you want to go. So here, if I make the decay a little bit longer, we can hear how it starts to descend in pitch. And then as I tighten up this decay, we'll hear it just get shorter and shorter. This pitch envelope is mainly useful for adding transients to any of your sounds. So if you want something to be a bit snappier, what you can do is use the pitch envelope and probably bring the decay in a bit, quite like this, and then bring the peak up. That is another way that we can shape our sounds within Operator. So now the last one that I'm going to make a 303 sort of acidy bassline sound. So again, make sure our notes are in F0, and we'll just do dotted eighths the whole time. Okay, now for this one, all we're going to do is use oscillator A. So we don't need any of these other three. And we're going to set this one to a saw wave. And we'll go to our filter here. And for now, I'm just going to leave the sustain all the way at 0 so we can get the filter movement exactly how we want. And then I'll start to bring this sustain back down. So that way we can get the full shape of what we're looking for. But to use the filter in Operator, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and bring the frequency down. Somewhere to about right there. You really only want the warmth of the low end to shine through, because this is where the frequency is going to land. In order to have the filter move up, what we'll do is we'll increase this envelope amount. I don't want it getting all the way up to the very top highs. Maybe a little bit slower. Okay, now I'll just bring this down. So here I was just listening to match the filter slope with the envelope of this first oscillator. It's all moving a bit too slow for the tempo that we're at, but that's okay because I wanted to make sure that the relationship between this decay and this decay sounded good. We can go ahead and use this time knob and start to dial it in. So now adding in a little bit of resonance here will help articulate what the filter's doing. And this is where it can start to get really sort of acid bassy. And so now I've just turned on 2 of the OTTs from the bass. Okay, so just to recap, here are the sounds that we made. We made a bonk first. Then we made a wub. We made our own 303. So the demos that I showed here aren't exactly the most perfect sounds, but with a little bit of processing, they can start to sound really, really good. Those are the 3 sounds we used in Operator. And we covered pretty much everything you need to know about making your own sounds. I will say that using just a bit of OTT and also erosion, which is just a white noise generator, that's really all you need to start making really, really crisp bass sounds in Operator. But I wanted to keep this video to the point and really simple when it comes to Operator. But for now, I hope that this video has helped demystify Operator just a bit so that you can start making your own sounds and your own FM bonks and wubs and whatever you want. With that, please be sure to like and subscribe. Make sure you hit the bell so you know when I post new videos. And we'll see you in the next one.